Mark Jenkins said, "Adventure is a path. Real adventure, self-determined, self-motivated, often risky, forces you to have firsthand encounters with the world." I feel like my guest, Jude Kriwald, encapsulates every bit of that quote. Jude is adventurous. From riding his bike to India from the UK, and most recently, his bike ride across West Africa. Get ready to see the world in a whole new way with my guest, Jude Kriwald. Welcome to Journey with Jake. This is a podcast about adventure and how through our adventures we can overcome the challenges of life that come our way. While I expect you will learn some things about different adventures, this show will entertain you. Each episode will feature a different guest or guests as they share experiences and stories from the different adventures they have been on. Not only will you be entertained, but you will also hear the failures and trials each guest faces and what they have done or are doing to overcome the hardships that come their way. My goal is to take each of us on a journey through the experiences of my guests with the hope that you'll be entertained and inspired to overcome your day-to-day challenges. After all, it's not all about the destination as it is about the journey. Welcome back to the show. My name is Jake Bushman, and I'm the host of Journey with Jake. So happy to have you here. If this is your first time here, you came for a great episode. Journey with Jake is all about adventure and overcoming challenges through adventure. And this episode has every bit of that and more. Before we get to my conversation with Jude, if you have not done so, please subscribe to Journey with Jake wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you happen to watch on YouTube, subscribe to my channel and hit that like button. Or maybe it's smash that like button. I don't know. Whatever they say, do something to the like button. Make sure you like it. You can also follow me on Instagram at Journey with Jake Podcast. This is a great way to see some clips from my shows, get a sneak peek of upcoming episodes, and follow along with me on my stories and personal posts as a way to get to know yours truly just a little bit better. Speaking of social media and YouTube, after this episode with Jude, you're going to want to follow him at Jude Kriwald on both Instagram and YouTube. Jude is currently out promoting his film, Alone Across Gola, in a variety of film festivals. The film is all about his adventures going through the jungles of Liberia and West Africa. We talk about his film and it being out right now, but please note, it is just out in the film festival circuit. It's not available online quite yet. Follow at Jude Kriwald, and that Kriwald is spelled Kriwald. Follow him on Instagram for more information about his film. If you like this episode, you will also enjoy episode 122 with Will Mehra about his adventures, including riding a rickshaw across Pakistan. Okay, let's get to my conversation with Jude Kriwald. I am really excited today because I have Jude Kriwald. Did I say it right?
Nailed it.
Yes. Nailed it. Perfect. Jude Kriwald on the show with me today. I found Jude just on Instagram just a few weeks ago, and I'm like, man, this guy is full of adventure. You just got done biking through West Africa by yourself, which was crazy. We're going to really dive into that. Before we do that, before we talk about your adventures, I want to know a little bit about who you are, where you're from. So tell us a little bit about Jude.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me on your show, Jake. It's a real privilege, and I'm looking forward to our chat. Yeah, my name's Jude Kriwald. You nailed it. My Polish grandfather will be very happy with that pronunciation. Yeah, I'm from England, from London, pretty much. Grew up there, and yeah, I've been adventuring since I was sort of 16, 17, trying to run away from school, get out on my bike for just an afternoon at a time, and then that sort of evolved to, oh, I want to go away for a few months at a time, evolved to I'm going for a year at a time. But yeah, it's funny because I don't really quite know where that sort of adventure streak came from initially, other than maybe some sort of escapism and not always fitting in. I think that was definitely a part of it. At school, I always found it hard to socialize. And I just found it, I always remember I was at boarding school. And so it's quite intense. Like if you're not getting on with people, and I was always getting into trouble, then you're kind of a bit stuck because you're surrounded by your peers the whole time. And I'd often just pick up my bike when I was 14, 15 years old and just cycle off for the whole afternoon, and often get in trouble for coming back late because I had some great little adventure just on a hillside somewhere in Hampshire in southern England. And yeah, I dropped out of school. Actually, I just wasn't fitting in. I was in quite a sort of posh, old, stuffy school. Although they had good intentions, it just wasn't for me, and I was getting in a lot of trouble, and I really, really wanted to travel. So I dropped out at 16. Thought I was going to travel straight away, and my mum said, "Well, obviously you're not traveling till you're 18, so go to work." So I started working, 16, paying rent to my parents, and saved up. Yeah, and when I was 18, I first started really, really traveling, and it's just sort of exploded a bit since then on the whole travel front. Yeah, in terms of my background, that's kind of it. I'm from the UK. I'm spending most of my time there, unless I'm on my bike, which normally means I'm somewhere else.
Wow. Okay. Boarding school. Why were you in boarding school? Was this something that your parents just kind of wanted you to have that experience? Or did you kind
Hmm.
of force their hand? What was the reason behind that?
Good question. They didn't send me away. No, it was I was at a school before that, which was a really sort of artsy school, and a lot of sort of, I don't know, musicians and rock stars sent their kids there. And as my mum tells me, I just wasn't being challenged enough. Like a lot of people, like I'm a relatively smart kid, and I was bored and misbehaving a lot. And she just thought, if he's not challenged, he's just gonna actually run amok. So sent me to another school, which is a bit more sort of academically focused. And it just is a boarding school by default, this particular school. And yeah, I didn't like it the first year, actually. I remember struggling to fit in, and it's a super old school. It's where they filmed a lot of Harry Potter, to give you an idea. That kind
You
of
went
school,
you went to Hogwarts.
basically. Yeah. Don't
Wow.
make me pull out some magic tricks.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was there, and I settled in eventually. But the boarding element, it's kind of really interesting because once you get used to it, it genuinely is fun, and most nights felt like a sleepover. But then there's the harder side of it. Of that school has these weird traditions of, like, if a more senior boy says that you're meant to do something like go to the sweet shop on his behalf, you just do it, and there's a sort of like seniority order. And I really struggle with that. Like, I've got a big anti-authoritarian streak in me, and I like rebelling against authority. So I had a tough first year because, people were sort of trying to put me in my place. And that probably actually contributed to this feeling of, you know what, I'm just going to grab my bike and head out into the woods. I've never really reflected on it like that, how that sort of difficult school environment might have fed into the adventure and wanderlust. But, just to be really clear, this wasn't some horrible 1800s Victorian boarding school experience.
Right.
Overall, I really enjoyed it, and I'm actually really glad I went there for the 2 or 3 more years that I was there. I really enjoyed it. I did quite well in my exams, which I don't think I would have done in another school. I think I would have just messed around too much, got into things I shouldn't have gotten into, whereas it's just about kept me on track. But yeah, once it started getting towards sixth form or the end of high school equivalent, and you're meant to start thinking about university and really long-term thinking, and everyone's talking about Oxford and Cambridge and becoming a doctor or whatever next, and I just thought, this isn't me, this isn't my path. I'm not afraid to say, it's a bit embarrassing, I just became a massive hippie in my head, as much as you can be being 16 while at boarding school. Discovered Bob Marley, and I just thought that, peace and love and traveling was all there was that I cared about, and I wanted out. And I don't regret it actually at all, because by the time my friends were finishing university, I'd done that year-long cycle to India, which I'm sure we'll touch on very briefly, and I joined a startup as a junior ops person. And by the time my friends were leaving, I was managing a team of 50 people.
Wow.
So it worked out for me. I do have that streak of not very good at doing something long and boring where the payoff is in the long run, but I roll my sleeves up, get my hands dirty now, and get really stuck in and work hard at something. So I think that's why that path worked well for me.
Well, and it sounds like you said you dropped out at 16, and
Mm.
it sounds like your parents are like, you're paying rent, so you
Yeah,
immediately
yeah,
went
yeah,
to work. At 16, you
yeah,
went
yeah.
to work.
Yeah, there were like no freebies for sure, and I'm glad of that. I remember my first job doing telesales, selling warranty for satellite TV boxes. It was super dodgy. Like, I mean, I wasn't doing anything dodgy, but there were people in that call center like stealing credit card numbers and things. And I did it for 2 or 3 months. I just thought, I need to get out of here and find a proper job. And yeah, I just saved up for a little bit, enough to, yeah, by the time I was 19, spend. I thought it was only going to be 6 months to cycle to India. It ended up taking me 13.
13
Um,
months.
13 months,
Wow.
yeah.
At 19 years old is when you started.
Yeah, so I was 19 when I started, 20 when I came back. And yeah, I thought, oh, I'll just fly through, because someone had done it in 4 months. And I thought, oh, I'll just take it easy and do it 6 months. But the thing is, one of my favorite things about cycle touring isn't the cycling. It's the cycling enables you to go to slow speed, and you're going at such a speed. It's a perfect speed, really, cycling, because you're going faster than walking, so you can actually cover a country every few days if you want to. Slow enough in a car, and you don't. When a car, you have the shield around you, right? You're cut
Yeah.
off from the outside world. In a bicycle, you're vulnerable. You sweat every hill and you enjoy every downhill. And people appreciate that honest approach. So people come and talk to you all the time. And the number of people who would come up to me and say, "Hey, where are you going? Come stay in my house," or whatever. It just meant the trip took way longer, because I was just loving that. And I really enjoyed connecting with people in that way.
So this trip, before we dive into that,
Yeah.
any other thing with the family? Any siblings or anything like that? Are you the only
Yeah.
child?
Yeah. I've got a sister, Lauren, who's 2.5 years older than me. She's a huge support and one of my number one fans. Yeah, we really get each other. We've got a close relationship. So if ever one of us is struggling, we just pick up the phone and talk to each other. And yeah, super cool. She doesn't have quite the same adventure bug to the same level, although she has borrowed my backpack a couple of times for some pretty cool trips of her own.
Very cool. Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right. So 19, you're like, okay, I'm taking this. I'm going to bike. Maybe it'll take me 6 months from England all the way to India.
Yeah.
Kind of give me the like, where are you going through? Because I'm picturing this in my mind. To get to India, you're going through places. I mean,
Yeah.
you're going through like the Middle East. Like, am I right?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah,
where
pretty
did?
much. So I could fly through the 18 countries. So it was like England, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Germany, Austria, and then you cross from the north of the Alps across into Italy, and to get to the south side of the Alps. And from then on, it was sort of sunny. It was summertime, so I could stop using my tent and just sleep out under the stars. That was gorgeous. Down to the bottom of Italy, then got the ferry across to Albania, and then Greece, Turkey, and then into Iran, where again, Iran should have been 3 weeks really, but I loved it so much. I spent 2 months there. I mean, just about everyone to tell you, I think Will on the last episode that I listened to was saying how hospitable the people in those countries are.
Mhm.
Iran, very hospitable. And then I was meant to go the classic Central Asian route of Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and then so on and so on into China. But I met this Spanish guy. He was cycling Spain to Australia, and we were in Iran near the Afghan border, ready to go into Turkmenistan. We were just looking at this map with Afghanistan on it, and we just thought, oh, it's kind of tempting, isn't it? Like, you're not going to be here again, are you? And yeah, that was the only real like big lie I've ever told my parents. Like, they know this now, but we went to Afghanistan, and I spent the next 3 weeks texting them as if I was in Turkmenistan, being like, oh, we just got to Ashgabat, or we just got to Merv, or whatever, which was obviously dishonest, and I was slightly uncomfortable about. My mum has since told me it was the right thing to do, because she was worried enough already. So Afghanistan, and then Tajikistan. And bear in mind, by the time I got to Tajikistan, it was midwinter. So I was there December, January. December and January. So I was in my tent on my own at this point again. Inside my tent, it was minus 31 Celsius. I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but I know minus 40 Fahrenheit is minus 40 Celsius. So not so far.
That's cold, is what that
It was,
is. That's really
yeah,
cold.
I had all my layers on and I was still cold. And then after Tajikistan, briefly into Kyrgyzstan, and then into Xinjiang in northwest China, the Muslim part of China, where the Uyghurs are. And then probably the highlight of my trip for me personally was sneaking through Tibet. So, you have the Tibetan plateau where I think for 30 days I didn't go below 4,000 meters, or maybe 13,000 feet above sea level. So to go to Tibet, because Tibet is administered by China, you need a Chinese visa, which I had, and you need a Tibetan permit. And you can't really get a Tibetan permit. To do it, you need to be with 3 other people of the same nationality as you. You need to have a tour guide, which costs thousands of dollars. You need to be in a Jeep. You need to stay on the main road, blah, blah, blah. It's just not viable. But every year, at least back then, one or two cyclists would chance it. And maybe every other year or so, one would get through. And so I emailed a few people who'd been through before, and some of them had sent me the GPS coordinates of where the checkpoints are, even though some of them move. And I just had the best time of my life. It was just stunning, roof of the world landscape, thin air, cold, and you cycle all day and you get towards a checkpoint, and then you stop about a kilometer short of a checkpoint, go camp out of sight, wait until about 3 a.m. in the morning. And this was the really hard part. You set your alarm and it's blowing a blizzard outside. It's freezing cold and it's dark, and you've got to get up, pack your tent up, and then try and sneak through these checkpoints. And
Wow.
I was incredibly lucky. I was incredibly lucky because there were two Spanish guys a week behind me. I was texting them all the coordinates. They got caught. I somehow made it through, and yeah. So after Tibet, it was down to Nepal and then India. And if I'd got caught, the reason it mattered so much is there was no other open border to India. I had to be from Tibet, Nepal, and then India. Otherwise, I'd been stuck, and the trip would have failed. I don't think, having spoken to one of the guys who cycles there the most, a guy called Jan Korax, I don't think anyone's made it through since. And that's not so much because I did so well. It's because I had a lot of luck, and they've tightened down a lot since. Like back then, the checkpoints didn't
Wow.
used to talk to each other. So like some of them knew I was there. Some of them
Gotcha.
saw me, but like I just
Yeah.
cycled off or whatever. So you can't do it now. So I mean, please, well, I don't want to say please try. I hope someone out there wants to try. Still give it a go, but it's harder. It's definitely
So
harder.
what would have happened if you would have got caught? They just
Well,
kicked you
thankfully,
back out?
yeah, I actually know what would have happened because, as I said, these two Spanish friends were a week behind me. They got caught, and it's kind of a known thing beforehand. You get deported, but they treat you
Okay.
well. They don't. So you're not locked away in jail for months, and you have to wait for
Mhm.
the British consulate to come. They ship you back to sort of China proper, wherever that is, whether it's Guangzhou or Beijing or Shanghai, and then you've got to sort your own way out. But I basically did have to hand myself in at the border with Nepal because obviously to enter Nepal you have to exit China. And I remember very clearly, I got there and suddenly there's all these tourists because they've been on these jeep tours that I talked about, and they were all there with their guides because you have to have a guide. And I got to the exit and the guy was like, "Where's your guide?" And I just played it dumb and I just kept pointing at my map and I was like, "This is my guide. I've got my guide." And it was a bit of a sort of slap on the wrist, a half an hour in a police room chatting away, being sorry, didn't know, sorry. I mean, I think it was a calculated risk. Like, what are they going to do? Send you back 2,000 miles into proper China? Like the exit's right there. Um, and I've been back since, so I don't think I got put on any bad lists. Hopefully, talking about it now isn't going to cause any too much
Yeah,
trouble.
right. What's amazing to me is, again, you were 19, 20 years old doing this. That's young.
Mm,
You're still a young guy at that point doing this.
yeah.
Were you young and, I don't want to say young and dumb. Were you young to where you didn't have any fear? I guess I'm sort of risk averse. And so to me, that's just so
Yeah.
risky what you did. What was it that made you just want to keep doing it?
I loved that. If you take that context of being at a school and compare it, I loved that when you're out in the wild on your bike, like the rules aren't set by any humans who said that these are the rules. I mean, okay, maybe that's not so much true with the Tibetan permit thing, but in terms of finding water, survival, finding food, getting up the hill, what sort of tent you have, it's really it's more of a game less against like the more senior boys at school trying to tell you what to do and more about, okay, well, the wind is blowing this way, the water's doing this, and it's the same question that our ancestors have had to deal with for thousands of years of like, how do I get by? It just feels like more of a fun, fair, open game, and I love the challenge. And in terms of fear and being young, I'm 12 years older now. I'm more cautious in terms of like physical risks. Like if I'm probably more careful jumping across stepping stones or something now than I was then. In terms of taking a risk with the authorities, I still get a real kick out of that. Only where it's warranted. I don't
Sure.
go looking
Yeah.
for trouble. I
Yeah, you're
respect,
not. Yeah, exactly. No, and
yeah,
I love seeing your personality and who you are. It's coming across, and so it's getting to know who you are a little bit better, which is awesome to see. We could go a whole hour just talking about this trip when you're 19.
no, sure, yeah,
I kind of wanted to skip over it kind of quickly. I want to get a little background on it because you
yeah,
just recently did a trip through West Africa,
yeah.
which I watched some of your YouTube videos. I was looking at your Instagram account. This was incredible by itself
Thanks.
as well. So give me the overhead view, where it went from where to where,
Yeah.
when it happened, and then let's hear some stories and things. We'll kind of dive into it a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for asking. So this was from December 2023 to the end of February this year, 2024. And the very short bit of context, which I think is important, is that after that cycle to India, I did do a few small other trips in the 10-year gap. But in short, the narrative, at least in my head, and this is somewhat what the film is going to be about, is I wanted to be an adventurer, but I didn't pursue it. I let exciting career opportunities and sort of professional growth come up, and I wouldn't say it got in the way, but it was definitely a different priority. And I'd often lie awake at night thinking, why aren't I out there adventuring? And so after years and years, I finally just got the courage to be like, you know what? I do want to be an adventurer. And that's kind of a hard thing to admit, because, when you admit your real passion to people, especially something which is sort of fanciful, which like everyone's like, yeah, of course I'd love to get paid to travel. Who wouldn't?
Hmm.
It's kind of hard because people can then like see, you know, they can see if you succeed, they can see if you fail, rather than just sort of getting by and be like, oh yeah, they was good at work and I got promoted, and that can feel good, but for me it wasn't fulfilling me. So that was the context of being like, right, I'm actually going to make a go of this. I know how to do it this time. When I came back from India last time, I was just a bit naive, and I just thought everything would fall into place, and I didn't really put the work in. So this was my effort to be like, let's do a trip which A, I'm going to really enjoy, and B, gives me a chance of maybe getting my name out there and making some cool adventures, and then helping other people to adventure. Um, so that was the context, and it was from Senegal to Liberia. So I did Senegal, Gambia, back into Senegal, and then Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. So 5 West African countries, all quite small countries. A couple of French speaking. When I say French speaking, as in the second language, the European colonizer language, and a couple that are English speaking in Liberia and Sierra Leone. And yeah, it was 3 months. And as part of what I just talked about, I took a camera. I took a few cameras, took a drone, took a GoPro, took some equipment and some microphones, and I filmed it. And I've never been a filmmaker before, but I just thought, let's do a trip which I really enjoy. Let's get some of those gnarly adventures in there, which I like, the things we talked about earlier of pushing the limits a little bit. And let's see if anyone, finds us interesting, and share it. And if they do, great. And if not, that's fine. I'm gonna have a nice trip either way.
Yeah, definitely. And you alluded to it. You kind of slipped and said the film is about.
Yes.
Tell me, okay, what's the film? Let's talk about the film.
Yeah, sure. So there's a short film. It's probably just about come out now. It's coming out mid-November. So probably out by the time this is out on YouTube, on my channel, and it's called Alone Across Gola. And this film is about. So I had this idea to cycle 3 months in West Africa, but I finished it in Liberia on purpose, because when you look at a map of Liberia, you look at all of West Africa, it's quite green. You zoom in on this part of Liberia, and it's just thicker, greener rainforest. And I thought, oh, what's it like to spend a night alone in the jungle? I really want to have that question answered. I want to have that experience. Again, for myself, purely for myself. It's not something that I can necessarily describe super well. So I knew that that would be the sort of the climax where I'd finish the trip. And the film is actually largely about that bit. It's when you look at the rainforest, there's a track that runs the whole way through it. And I'm not going to give too many spoilers away, but in short, on every single map I looked at, there's a section of this track that goes through the middle where the track is missing. And I just thought, why is the track missing there? And the alternative was a long way around on a main road, and I just thought, that's boring. I want to go the way I want to go through the rainforest. And so I took the track as far as I could. Unsurprisingly, the track did run out, and then a real adventure began. Yeah, in short, some guys helped me through the start of it. One of them then robbed me in the middle of the jungle, which wasn't much fun because he did have a machete. From then onwards, I was alone, and the track didn't start where I thought it would start again. So it was a lot further than I thought. There was a lot that happened, and it's kind of hard to summarize. But all the bridges were collapsed, and food ran low. I guess maybe the easiest way to summarize it isn't by what happened, but the experience I had when I came out the other side. Eventually, I remember when I first had phone signal again, and I sort of finished. I remember chatting to my girlfriend on the phone. And I was like, "How are you?" And she told me how she was, and she said, "How are you?" And I just didn't really want to talk. And I think it's because I'd gone to some weird level of like self-reliance, which is super interesting. But I'm not saying it's necessarily super. It's not healthy. I don't want to live like that every day. And thankfully, I've come back from that. But I just, my bike weighs 53 kilos, or I don't know, 110, 120 odd
Hmm.
pounds with all the equipment. And I was carrying it on my back for large parts of the day. I only managed 5 miles or 8 kilometers each day. It was, I meant to have an adventure, but this was 10 times harder than I expected. And so I went to a different place than I was expecting to go mentally. And it was kind of an interesting thing, right? There's no phone signal, there's no electricity, there's no tarmac. So when something goes wrong, when you hurt yourself, when you cut yourself, there's no one to complain to, and also no point complaining. And so you sort of get used to just a bad thing would happen, like my bike would fall on me, and I might shout out in pain, but like there was never like a negative emotion. Like that talking in my head just was silenced because there was no use. It's like, well, forwards, move forwards, move forwards. And yeah, so the film is largely about that experience, but actually it's in the wider context of what I talked about the trip to India 10 years earlier and wanting to make it as an adventure, and just how hard it is to, we all have these dreams that we do or we have when we're younger, and at some point we let them slip. And it just sort of explores, what that's like, and what it's like to try and reignite them, I guess. So yeah, the film's Alone Across Gola, and it's probably out now on YouTube.
Sweet. Alone Across Gola. Check it out. Yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Jay.
So something that's interesting about that whole experience, had you had known that it was going to be as hard as it was, do you think you would have attempted it in the first place?
That's a really good question. I think about this because I often end up on adventures where I think it will be sort of 7 out of 10 hard, and I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds great. And then it's 9 out of 10 hard, and I'm like, really, this is what I really like. I'm glad it was like this, but I don't know if I'd ever choose the 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 difficulty ones, because there's an element there's an element of them being dangerous,
For
like
sure.
genuinely sometimes dangerous. Would I have chosen it? I mean, definitely not if I'd known I was going to be robbed, because that could have gone quite bad. I really had to think on my feet quickly to de-escalate that one, because he was my guide. He knew where I was. I didn't know where I was. My GPS didn't work under the canopy of the trees. He knew the way out. I didn't know the way out. And there were two of them. And so it could have gone a lot worse. But in the end, we actually talked it out and I got the money back. So it was a bit of a crazy experience. And the most bizarre thing of all is that the GoPro on my bike, I forgot to turn off. So it recorded the whole thing. So I'm probably giving away too many spoilers now, but it's in the film.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I was going to ask more question about that, but I'll watch
No
it on
more
the
on that
video.
one.
I'll watch it on yeah, we'll watch it on the film.
Yeah, but it's a good question. I don't know. I can answer a different question, which is I'm really glad I had the experience. I don't know if I'd have chosen it at that level. I guess there's always a margin of error, right? I knew that let's say I knew the danger was between 6 and 8 out of 10, and it turned out it was more like 8 or 9. But if I chose a trip where I knew the danger was 8 or 9 out of 10, then there's a risk that the danger goes to 10 out of 10, and then you're finished.
Sure. Yeah.
So
It's a
I
good way
like
to
to have
look at
that
it.
sort of that little window, I guess.
Yeah. No, no, for sure. Why did you choose West Africa?
Yeah, good question. Because I know so little about it. If I'm really honest, after when I cycled to India, when I look back on that trip, maybe it's rose-tinted glasses, but the world seems so exciting to me, and Instagram wasn't really a thing. People still use guidebooks all the time, and I just felt like any place I'd turn up in, there's just an exciting story to be found. Whereas now, and this is a negative mindset, which I know isn't entirely realistic, or is a choice maybe, but if you say a country to me, like let's think of countries I haven't been to, Brazil or Guatemala or I don't know, Indonesia, I instantly have an idea in my head of what that place might be like, or I could Google it and I could see 1,000
Mhm.
images of this beach.
Yep.
There's a beach I went to when I was 18 in India, which for me, we discovered this beach for ourselves, and we had the most amazing time there. We found ourselves, blah, 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 all this cliched stuff. And you can look it up now on Google Maps and it's got 500 reviews, but like it wasn't a known thing then. And so I sort of had this feeling of feeling jaded about travel and there not being many places that excited me. Again, I realize that's up to me, that mindset. But West Africa was different. You don't really hear too many people talking about going to West Africa. And I didn't have any preconceptions. If you said to me, Guinea in West Africa, nothing pops into my head. And so I was like, I want to know what's it like to be in West Africa. I want to know as best I can what's the life like of the average West African villager. And it also, it seemed like a fun place to cycle, some interesting wildlife and jungle. So I guess that's probably why.
Interesting. And it's interesting you say that, because when I think of West Africa too, that's not, you said Senegal. I think like you said Sierra Leone, I think what,
Yeah.
civil unrest, like
Yeah.
civil
Yeah.
war, that comes to mind. But
Sure.
otherwise, when you think of Africa, you're thinking of, places like South Africa or East
Hmm.
Africa, where you've got, some of these safari locations and things like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think West Africa is a little bit unique. There still has got
Yeah.
to be the wildlife element, and you're out there riding in it.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the reasons West Africa is interesting is because it's so underdeveloped, even compared to the rest of Africa, except for maybe Central Africa. West Africa was hit by the Ebola crisis, right, in 2014 and the years that followed. So it absolutely knocked it back years. And then on top of that, it's coup central. So whilst I was there, I think 2 or 3 out of the 5 or 6 countries I was trying to go to had coups or attempted coups. So it's quite an unstable region. But again, I took the opportunity because it was the most stable it's been for a while. You couldn't go there 10 years ago and do the
Mhm.
cycle in the same way. I'm sure people have went, but it would have been a 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 from the start level rather than starting at 6 or 7. In terms of the wildlife, it's not like what you picture in a safari park. So there
Mhm.
are technically, not technically, there are lions, there are leopards, there are hyenas, there are snakes, there are crocodiles. They're not in abundance, sadly, because there's too much. West Africa is quite densely populated, so there's not big wild, Serengeti type plains.
Right.
You do have to be careful. I did have it. It's actually in one of my first or second YouTube episode, I think, a scare with some hyenas in my tent at night when I realized whilst in my tent. I googled the area I was in, and then I realized I was in a reservoir which is famous for having lots of leopards and hyenas. And I'd seen some footprints early in the day that I thought were dog footprints, and I looked up hyena footprints, and I was bricking it that night. But then again, you learn things on the ground, right? Like before I got there, I was researching all this. I was like, oh, it's a bit scary, but I'll just start in the cities and I'll slowly work my way out. And you learn things on the ground you can't learn in person. Like if you get to a village at night and you see that there are goats walking around, then you know that the villagers aren't worried about leopards. Otherwise,
It's
they'd
true.
take their goats in. And so you think, cool, the goats are out. I should be fine. They'll probably eat the goats first. And so you do these little things, which you just can't know when you're back at home trying to Google it.
Just gotta experience it, I guess.
Yeah.
So you started off in Senegal. What are the people like? And then when you're going through villages, and I'm imagining you're going through a little bit of city here and there as well. I think I saw that on one of your
Yeah.
videos.
Yeah.
What's that experience like? So tell me about the people in this, what it's like being in the city biking part of it. That's gotta be a little bit more challenging, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, in the first 10 minutes of cycling in West Africa, I was in Dakar, in Senegal, the capital of Senegal. I got knocked off my bike straight away, and I very quickly learnt my place. It's actually crazy how they drive there, and a lot of the developing world is similar, although I haven't had it quite like this. You were literally, actively invisible to them. So if you're riding along and they drive on the right, like most of the world, and you're on the hard shoulder, the inside lane, and there's a car behind you and they want to turn off right in say 100 yards or 100 meters, they'll pull up in front of you, and even if it's just totally cutting you off to the point you have to slam on your brakes and skid, they'll just pull in front of you, and they expect you just to get out of the way. You should always be looking over your shoulder, and I didn't know this, and I did put my brakes on pretty quickly, but I was on sand, and so I skidded and went under. So yeah, the cities are quite hectic. They're so vibrant though, and the people are really friendly, really hardworking, very enterprising. I don't think there's anyone who's traveled Africa who won't tell you that the people are enterprising. They will make things out of things you didn't think you could make anything out of. The chairs you see made out of scrap metal or things they piece together to keep going because they just don't have the funds to import things like we do. So they have to keep reusing and reusing and reusing. And as for the people, generally extremely friendly, extremely curious, very curious. Why is this white person traveling through our country on a bike? Like, doesn't he have to go to work? And it's a genuine question because,
Mhm.
and this is a real thing I sort of was very interested by initially, and then also was sensitive to, and also struggled with a bit, was when you're in the villages, the concept of leisure is totally foreign to some people. They don't have the same concept of taking a month off for leisure. If I said I'm cycling for 2 months through West Africa or 3 months, some people would say, well, don't you have a wife? Don't you have a farm to tend? And I had some very, very interesting and sometimes inspiring, sometimes heartbreaking meetings with people, and found I was expecting a lot of people to want to talk about colonial history, and I was expecting to, sort of have to be on the back foot a little bit and sort of say like, yeah, our country did some awful things here, like the Brits did in Sierra Leone. They were never interested in that. They were way more interested. They have a lot of the villagers, and I don't want to say anything that I think about this in particular, but they have a lot of Western white people on pedestals, and which, in a way, I think is kind of sad. They will say, "No, but you guys are scientists. You invented this, you did that, and you're all the footballers." A lot of them would just assume I'm a football manager. I had people come up to me and say, "Will you manage me? I'm a good footballer," and as if I
Oh,
represent the world of white footballers because that's all they see on the telly. And, those countries struggle with a lot of corruption. And when they see the West on TV, it's either footballers or it's Hollywood. And so everything looks pretty perfect and glitzy. And so they really have white people on an unfair pedestal. And that was a lot of sensitive conversations I wasn't expecting to have. I wanted to be like, well, hold on a minute. It's not like that, actually. We did some awful things here. But I was there to listen more than anything. It was kind of fascinating to learn.
Yeah, and I don't, again, you don't have to give anything away from the film or whatever, but is there any examples? Because you mentioned some things were heartbreaking, some of the people you talked to. Do you have any examples that you could share?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I do remember one where um, I was in a village and an elderly lady, she looked to me to be maybe 65, 70. She came up to me and she asked me to marry her. And she asked me to marry her not out of love or anything, but because she was totally poor, destitute, and marrying her would have meant financially, she would have been okay. She wasn't even saying, like some people do, oh, take me back to England. I heard that quite a lot more in Central Asia and in Afghanistan. People say, take me back to England, let me work for you, which, that alone you have to handle sensitively. But a poor elderly lady saying, please marry me, I thought, what did I do to get to be in this position and you're in this position? And I don't really have the words to go into it, but
Mhm.
it really makes you reflect on fortune. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Wow. Let's talk about the money part a little bit.
Yeah, yeah,
Obviously,
sure. Mm.
got your money back from being robbed, and that's another part. But I mean, are you carrying cash? Do credit cards work? What's the story? Like, how does this
That's a
work?
that's a good question. A lot of cards don't work, and I got caught out once or twice. So in most of that part of West Africa, if anyone is planning on going there, take a Mastercard, not a Visa. I'm not paid by either of them. I took two or three Visas, two or three Mastercards, also an American Express. Most of the ATMs from Senegal down to Liberia, they want Mastercard, which is fine if you've got your money on an account with a Mastercard. Um, yeah, 4 out of 5 ATMs don't work. And then when they do work, I literally had one power cut on me whilst my card was in the machine, because power cuts are sadly super common there, and there's just not enough power to go around, so that it either scheduled to go off at night, or sometimes it just happens, unannounced. But yeah, I would try and carry. You basically look and think, okay, what's the next big city in 1, 2, 3 weeks time, and then take maybe twice as much money as you think you'll need until then, in case. Because if when you get there, there's no ATM. There's no like travelers checks. There's no one you
Yeah.
can you can do whatever those companies are. I can't think of them, like Western Union and equivalent like that. They're pretty big actually, because a load of people who have migrated from West Africa to the West, they send family back home. You see
Mhm.
all those adverts, Remitly or
Yeah.
whatever it is, all the time. They're big out there, and you see those guys sat there with suitcases full of cash, and it is for people sending money home, and then people get money out. So yeah, when my card stopped working on me, I had to start sending myself Western Union with money. And yeah, cash is king. Nowhere apart from maybe a supermarket in a capital city would take card.
Wow. They want cash, cold
Yeah,
hard cash.
cold hard cash.
And when you're out cruising around, are you just sleeping in a tent? Are you sleeping in like people's
Mm.
homes? Is it just kind of random? What's the lookout like for that, for where you're
Yeah,
staying?
I pretty much did tents the whole way, and I actually took a hammock as well. Like, it's funny, like when it comes to things like your bike and tents, I'd normally buy pretty good equipment that will last years. But it was a last minute impulse buy, £8.99 on Amazon. I got a hammock with like a little jungle net over the top, and because I had that question of like, what's it like to sleep in the jungle all on your own? And in my head, you just have to be in a hammock, right? If you're doing that experience. So I only used it for 2 nights, I think, in the jungle. But yeah, that was one of the challenges as well. Like wild camping on the cycle to India, I just got so used to, you cycle out of a town and you're in the countryside. You start looking for a nice little spot with a view by a river, whatever. As I said, West Africa is really densely populated, and it's either thick overgrowth jungle or it's been cleared, and it's been cleared because someone is doing something with that land. They don't have vast open fields like we're used to in Europe or North America,
Mhm.
that are unused half the time or empty. So it was really hard to find a camping spot. And one of the golden rules of camping is don't be seen. You arrive late, just before sunset, you cook quickly, you go to sleep, you wake up at sunrise, and you go. And that way you reduce the risk of anything happening, anyone spotting you. In West Africa, that wasn't possible. All the time, I'd set my tent up, and then half an hour later, you'd look up. I had a group of 30 villagers watch me eat my dinner. Very friendly, and I couldn't tell them to go away because I was outside their village. But I really wanted to be on my own that night, and I had like 3 packets of instant ramen, and I said hello, and they said hello, and I was like, "Do you want anything?" They're like, "No." And I was like, "Okay, I guess you're just gonna watch me eat my ramen then." And I just ate my ramen for 20 minutes with an audience, which was, now looking back, I'm happy I had the experience. But at the time, where you're sweaty, you kind of want to wash, maybe you want to go to the loo, and you've got this audience, it can be really tiring.
People checking you out.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
there was literally when everyone sort of went after that evening, and there was a few kids left around, and eventually there was just one kid, and I didn't have the outer cover on my tent because I didn't need it. I just had the sort of mosquito net, and he was just stood there staring, and I was like, "Hey, look, can you please go now?" I just got a bit fed up. I was like, "Go," and he said, "Okay," and then he didn't go, and I said, "Please go," and he said, "Give me money," and I said, "No, sorry, I'm not going to," and he said, "Fine, I'll come back in the morning," and I woke up 5 minutes before sunrise, and he was stood there.
He was
He
there. He
wasn't
came back. Wow.
he wasn't lying, he came back. So, yeah, it was actually kind of weird how hard it was to get, alone time. But again, I can't complain about it, like, it's such a rare thing for, them to see, someone traveling through on leisure time, a totally different complexion and so on.
Yeah, for them it's just out of the ordinary. So it's something unique. You kind of talked about, setting up a tent, being kind of
Mm.
dirty. I know from watching a couple of your videos. Yeah, you looked a little ragged a few times. You
Yeah,
looked a little like what were the elements like? Was it hot? Was it
yeah.
cold? Was it, what was the
Yeah, sure,
how often could you bathe? That kind of thing.
it was hot, I can tell you that much. It wasn't, like, crazy, crazy, I'm sorry, I don't know Fahrenheit, but yeah, in Celsius, it was like 30, 35 Celsius, which is still pretty hot. But then
Hmm.
the killer thing was the humidity. So you would often, yeah, especially in the jungle in Liberia, I would spend all day just absolutely soaked through, underwear soaked, shorts soaked, shirt soaked, to the point where every half an hour I would take off my t-shirt and I'd wring it out, and I could
Wow.
fill up a half pint just with sweat every half hour. So that was quite intense. And yeah, the sun was very strong. So I went through different hats. I had sort of my Western style adventure hat to start with, and that felt a bit goofy. So in Gambia, I got a sort of local tribal hat, which is amazing because, you know, it's made to work in Gambia and it worked really well. Good ventilation, good sun protection. And yeah, in terms of washing, before I got to the jungle at least, I'd probably get to like, even guest houses are quite rare in West Africa unless you're in a big city. I try and find a guest house every week or so to have a day off to rest my legs, literally rest my legs from cycling, let any injuries sort of iron themselves out. But yeah, otherwise, I'd be drinking from well water. If I could find a well, I would use the well, which is an experience in itself. You have to learn how to try and not fall down. It's very easy to get pulled by the bucket and almost go
Oh,
down.
wow.
Sadly, that does happen sometimes. And then, yeah, I'd be washing in rivers, but you have to be careful because if you're in a big river, there are crocodiles. So, like, much better to find a small stream. Make sure you're not upriver of a village and you don't be washing in their drinking water. But yeah, there aren't tons of streams like in Senegal and Gambia because it's kind of the Sahel. It's like the bit just below the Sahara, so it's still really quite hot, and you haven't gone down to jungle level yet. And then when you get further south, it's rainforest, and yeah, and then you have lots of streams. And I love, yeah, I'll say, there's no one around. Totally strip off, get in there, have a wash, have a float, just look up at the trees and float there, and think this is a pretty nice bath actually.
Crazy. What would you say besides, being robbed? What was the most challenging part of the whole thing?
I think if I remember, yeah, trying to remember accurately, I think I've actually touched on it already. It was, and I have to your listeners have to forgive me if any of this sounds insensitive. I struggled with the connections with local people. I really wanted, as I said, to go there, chat to people, and have a similar experience to what I had maybe in Asia of they can learn something about me if they want. I really want to learn something about them and just have sort of a two-way conversation or two-way exchange. But the equality was so vast that it was really hard to bond with people. And that's not because I was sat there thinking, oh, we're so different, but you can't even begin to relate on the same things. And even that concept I said of leisure time being a totally foreign concept, or I would often get to a village, and most villages I would cycle through, one or two kids at least would point and shout, white man, white man. And, I'm pulling into a village, hot, sweaty, running out of water. I want to ask someone where the well is, and I'd love to stop and have a quick chat with someone, a friendly face, and, ground myself a bit. And,
Hmm.
maybe someone even say welcome or show you around or whatever. And there were times where entire villages, including the adults, would be chanting and pointing, white man, white man. And, you don't really want to stop because, and I realize, the irony of talking about objectification in West Africa, being a Brit and what the Brits did there, but you're basically being objectified as like a flying pig. They're like, wow, look at that novel thing. I don't blame anyone for a second, by the way. I'm not saying they should do anything different, but it's hard. And I didn't expect it. So those few people who I did have proper conversations with, I'd go to a barber every few weeks because actually, if you sit down in a barber chair for long enough, you actually, sometimes people would be pointing and they'd go, white man. And I'd walk up to them and say, hello, hello. And then they sort of snap out of it like, oh, you're a human. I need to talk to you like a human and not just point at you.
Wow. Yeah.
So it taught me a little bit about objectification. It made me think about, objectification of women or other people in society. It's not as a, white sort of middle class man. It's not something I've really felt before. And that was eye opening and really challenging.
Interesting to hear about. So
Mm.
one thing you said, we talked about, hey, it was a 8 or 9 level as far as difficulty and being hard. And if you would
Yeah.
have known that, maybe it's harder to maybe decide to choose something like that. But you said it
Mm.
was rewarding.
Mm.
What was about the whole thing? What was it that was so rewarding, and what made it so rewarding for you?
That's an interesting question. I find it rewarding looking at places that I know nothing about, which on the surface seem scary and dangerous and impassable. And I take great joy after doing research well, and then you land on the ground and your research pays off. So that's part of it. I think it's just, like maybe this is a bit cliched, but we have so many safety nets around us, and I'm grateful for them. Whether it's healthcare or law enforcement or the judicial system or whatever, there are safety nets around us to try and keep everything easier than it was 1,000 years ago, or even 200 years ago. And I'm grateful for them. But it does mean that a huge part of what it means has meant to be human for the last 100,000 years, we no longer have to use. We no longer have to use that part of us which instinctively can work out, you know, where the next water source is going to be, or what to do in terms of going this way or that way, or where the sun is, or I don't know. It's hard to think of good examples, but it's just really satisfying to engage those parts of your brains where you wake up, you've got a very simple purpose, which is I want to move myself 100 kilometers. And then to do that, I need to pedal. So I need food, I need some water, and there needs to be a road. And at the end of the day, you've done your 100 kilometers or so, and you look for a campsite, somewhere to put your tent up, you pitch your tent, you eat your dinner, and you almost instantly fall asleep with a massive grin on your face because you had a simple purpose and everything you needed to achieve your purpose was there in front of you. Um, and I find that, when I'm working back in the UK, so many of our goals are stretched way out months in advance, right? Like this film I've been working on it for 5 or 6 months. And that's great and it's enjoyable, but it does, whenever you do that, you take a little bit of your contentment from the present and you sort of loan it to your future self, which means you're in debt now. You're like, I'll be happy when this thing in the future. Whereas on these cycle trips, it's everything I want to achieve, I can achieve today. And I've got all the tools here. I don't really need to rely on too many people to do it. And I can just get it done by relying on me. And I think it's quite nice, that feeling of relying on oneself. I don't misconstrue that. I'm a very open, emotionally vulnerable person when I'm around my friends and family. But it's really nice to be able to remind oneself, like, I'm actually a pretty capable person, as almost all of us are.
That's good. I appreciate you sharing that. Something that you're
Mm.
doing that which I think is pretty awesome, and you have a website called adventurementor.org. Would you
Mm.
mind just kind of sharing a little bit about what you got going on there and what your project is with that?
Yeah, thanks. I'd love to. So, yeah, adventuremental.org, it's something I started this year to help more people go on adventures and from a more diverse range of backgrounds. So, when you look at people who sort of made it as adventurers, people who are getting paid to adventure, it's often, people who come from middle class backgrounds, predominantly white men. And Adventure Mentor was my way of trying to help diversify the people who can go on adventures. So, it's very simple. Anyone, and I mean anyone who wants to go on adventure. I do prioritize people from lower income households or women or people of color who wants to go on adventure, whether that's a 1 night trip or a 3 year walk around the world. I'm offering free one-to-one mentoring sessions. So that's sort of, I've positioned myself as the adventure mentor, hence the website adventurementor.org. You can go on there, book a free session. I've already started doing a few. I've still got some spaces for this year, and we can talk about anything, whether it's the practical stuff, like where do you sleep at night? How do you find maps, to stuff about confidence, and how do you have this conversation with your partner about being away for months at a time? So yeah, I just, if I'm going to make adventure my living, which I'm determined to do, I want to make sure it gives back as well.
I love that. That's a great project to have. And I think that's a awesome thing that you're doing, especially because, like you said, some people in their minds, they just think they probably can't do it because they
Mm,
think, I don't have the funds or I don't have the ability for whatever reason.
yeah.
But it sounds like what you're saying is anybody can do it. And I'm here to help with that at no
Yeah.
cost.
Yeah, it is doable, and I would just take great joy out of help people, being the catalyst to help someone get across that line. Like, I spoke to a woman in her 50s who wants to cycle pretty much around the world for a year or two, and some of the things you just don't realize, you don't know what you don't know. And she was thinking, well, I'm just going to get so tired. And she didn't ever think of the concept of a rest day, because when you're doing these long cycles, every 5 or 6 days, you stop for a day, as I said, 2 nights in a guest house or something, and you stretch your legs out. But when you watch these YouTube videos, including mine, of big adventures, no one talks about the rest days because they're boring
No. Yeah.
mostly, or they don't look gnarly or whatever. Red Bull's never going to pay you to be on a rest day. And so she didn't know that rest days were a thing. And I was like, oh, yeah, by the way, make sure you take rest days. And it blew her mind. And suddenly she was like, oh, this trip's really doable now. So it's not that I have some mad, crazy expertise from years and years. It's just useful to talk to someone who's done it. And as I said, this stuff for me started taking a really good friend of mine on, who hadn't been out many times on adventures, just taking him one night out. We went out together backpacking, and I saw how much difference it made to him. And I thought, you don't have to be cycling around the world. You can just do a little adventure, and it makes a big, big difference. So yeah, if anyone wants to do some mentoring with me, it's at adventurementor.org, and I'd love to help.
Awesome. Appreciate you sharing that. Besides adventurementor.org, you got the film that's out now.
Yeah.
What does the future hold? What do you think?
So I'm focused on the film for the next few months, and I've got a trip coming up to New Zealand over Northern Hemisphere winter, New Zealand summer, so December, January, with my partner. I'm really excited. We're going to be hiking from top to bottom the South Island of New Zealand. I'm really excited about this trip, actually, partly because this is separate to my adventure career. I'm just doing this to spend time with my girlfriend for 2 months, because we're both into backpacking, but we've been dating 5 years and have never gone traveling together, which is kind of crazy. So we're just going to go. This trail is 60 days of pretty much non-stop walking. Again, don't forget to take rest days, and you just get lost in the wilderness. So I'm excited for that. That's sort of something for the soul. And after that, I do have a sort of big record-breaking cycling somewhere you're not meant to be cycling idea for next year, but I'm going to keep that one under wraps now. So you have to stay posted for that one, Jake.
Perfect. And I will. Absolutely. Speaking of that, if people want to follow along, we know there's adventurementor.org.
Mm.
Where can people find you? What's your social media?
Yeah,
Where can people
thanks.
find
So
you?
on YouTube and Instagram, it's just my name, Jude Kriwald, so Jude, and then my surname, Kriwald. That's me on Instagram, same on YouTube. So yeah, I post most like little updates, or all the updates on Instagram. The film will also be going on YouTube, so you can subscribe on there, and should be out about now, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. It should be out about now. Perfect. Let's keep to that. That'd be awesome. This
Yeah,
was inspiring for me. Just what you've done, looking at your videos, who you are, amazing. I think it's awesome that you're doing this. For you, what does the word adventure mean to you?
it means something to do with being outside the comfort zone. I think an adventure, if you say I want to go on an adventure, it's basically saying I want to step outside my comfort zone, and I know that there will be something good in there, whether that's growth that's a bit difficult, or just pure fun and joy, or beautiful scenery. I think it means, yeah, stepping away from the day to day and trying something different. And it's almost like a mindset. You got to have that little glint in your eye, and like, when what might happen. And I don't know, but I'm looking forward to it. So that's definitely not the dictionary definition for you, Jake, but it's an answer.
I love it. Jude, thank you so much for coming on Journey with Jake.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, Jake.
Thank you to Jude Kriwald for coming on Journey with Jake and sharing your amazing adventures with us. Be sure and give Jude a follow on YouTube and Instagram at Jude Kriwald, and Kriwald is spelled Kriwald. And while you are there, you're going to want to check out his film, Alone Across Gola. either at a film festival or whenever it gets released online. And you can follow his Instagram account for updates on the film and when it will be released. Also, check out adventurementor.org to learn more about how Jude is helping mentor those who are looking to find and pursue their own adventures. Jude, thank you so much. That was incredible. Thanks to each of you for tuning in and listening to Journey with Jake each and every week. It means the world to me. I love doing this. It has been a dream come true for me, and I want to thank all of you for making that happen. If you enjoyed this, consider leaving me a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you don't want to, that's okay too. I'm just happy you are here. Next week, I have Danielle Kiesling on the show. Danielle is an award-winning celebrity stylist, and we have a great time talking about her journey and adventures. Be sure and tune in next week. Just remember, it's not always about the destination as it is about the journey. Take care, everybody.